The last video in this class, I want to focus on a job. This job is sports information directors. This gives you, I want to give you a picture of what you can do in media relations if this is something you want to do. Obviously, there's lots of things you can do in marketing, but this is one avenue in media relations, and I want to kind of give you an idea of who they are. Sports information, or SIDs as they're commonly referred to, also have other names. Sports media relations practitioners, we call that here at SFA, sports information specialist, public relations person. All of it really doesn't matter because what they are, they're marketers. They're marketers for the athletic department. They may be marketers for individual sports. Larger programs may be individualized to a specific sport. At SFA, they take a handful. There's 3 of them that take a handful of sports. At smaller, maybe Division III schools, there may be just one person. And so they're essentially marketers for that sport or that team. COSIDA is essentially the College Sports Information Directors of America. The COSIDA is, it's important to know these because it represents the best interest for SIDs at all levels of college athletics. If you're looking to work in sports, specifically in college athletics and information directors, I highly suggest you get involved in SFA's SIDs, but also go check out COSIDA in that they discuss a lot of the important topics that affect the industry, and they also have a lot of jobs that are posted there. They also provide a code of ethics, and so a big part of what SIDs do are confidentiality. Confidentiality is different than anonymity, and that confidentiality is you know who they are and you have information about them, yet you are required either by law or by ethics standards not to release that information. So, for example, for SIDs, they have confidentiality they have to adhere for student athletes. They have to protect the rights of athletes legally. So this has to do with health. So they have the right to, through HIPAA, which is a health law, to not release information to the media about a individual athlete's injury to an extent. They are also governed by educational laws, that is FERPA, that says that they cannot release grade information without permission of the student, either to media or any other personnel. Also, any other personal issues, they have different confidentiality agreements. So, essentially, what does an SID do? SID has basically 3 skills. First one is communication, second one's cooperation, and the third one's leadership. Communication is pretty much everything they do. That's their life. They communicate things. They do it through print, so they produce things such as press releases, so milestones, or another thing they produce are game notes. Another one are media guides. We'll talk about those in a minute. They have verbal communication skills, so interviews, media days. They do radio. They also have electronic communication. So it'd be email correspondence they have with media. They deal with different video creations, highlight videos in conjunction with their marketing department. They may even do things as far as create graphics. It kind of depends on the organization you're in. Second thing they do is cooperation. Cooperation is really working with the different sports. So you might have 15 different sports. Well, that means you have 15 different coaches with 15 different mindsets, with 15 different personalities. Oh, and by the way, you have 15 large sets of athletes that you have to deal with. And so there's also in that administration. So you have athletic directors, associate athletic directors, assistant athletic directors. You sometimes have VPs that have their hand in athletics. You've got the president or the board of regents. All of those things impact it. And then you also have leadership skills. So you're in charge of the media. You have to make sure they have the right information, are sitting in the right places. If you're not organized, if you're not assertive, and you won't get it done. You also have a personality that has to make a difference. In other words, you have to have a positive attitude to create positive situations. You're trying to get the media to cover your sport in a positive way, and if you're not doing that, they're going to pretty much say whatever they want. So let's talk about some other skills. One of the skills is writing. One thing that many sport information directors, SIDs, do are create news releases. These are very similar to news stories. They're written by the print and broadcast media. They usually represent the hard news. So these are the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And usually utilize this idea of an inverted pyramid, where you start with the most important information first, and then throughout the story you get the less important information. It's kind of how people read basically any type of story. They try to find the important information. Well, if you provide at the top. But that's typically what news releases are. They're placed on the athletic department or sport organization website and sent to local media so that they can cover it or use that information to write their own story. They also produce things known as game notes, and this is kind of what you see here on the right on your screen. This includes things such as quick points about the game, storylines, something that be unique about rivalries or something like that. It also provides statistics throughout the season, historical trends, those types of things. You also see historical information about the teams themselves, and then any records that might be important. These are produced game-by-game basis by the SID and are used by the media to assist with game stories. Another one is producing media guides. This includes writing or editing the entire body of the media guide. Typically, media guides are now digital in nature. I'm not going to go too much into detail about this, but it is information that you would give to a media as they enter a facility or at a game so that they can do their job. Essentially, what might happen is they might send a media outlet, might send somebody who's never been to even a game before, doesn't even know anything about the sport. You have to provide as much information to them as possible so that they can write their story. The easier you make their job as an SID, the easier you make that media relations job, that news outlet's job, the more likely they'll provide a positive story for you. You also might be in charge of writing feature stories. This is what we call the soft news, and these are feature stories, something that tells a story about the athlete, the coaches, the administrators, typically the things you would see in like a Sports Illustrated. You may also be, depending on the size of your organization, in charge of web design. Usually has a big part of departments and organizations on their own. Smaller organizations, you'd be involved in this, and sometimes you outsource it, but the information still has to come from the SID. You may also have verbal skills that you have to do, so many times you're running interviews, asking questions of athletes, and putting those videos up online, and so verbal skills are part of that. You also have to, part of your job, have game management and game day media ops responsibilities. When you're hosting an event at home, you are the sports information director that is in charge. You may also have other SIDs or media relations specialists from other universities come, and your job is to supply that information. So you're in charge of assigning seats for game day, so where do you sit and how do you prioritize that? You're also in charge of making sure there are supplies for media, so that includes live broadcast. So if a radio broadcaster forgets a headset, you need to have quickly be able to replace that. You want to make their job as easy as possible. You're also in charge of staffing the scoring table and the press box. So who are your scoreboard operators, who are your timers and clock scorebook operators? All of that comes down to the SID in many organizations. Another job duty is conducting interviews, either yourself or preparing students and coaches for interviews. Typically, you work with the media. Media will typically request an interview with a player or coach, or you might suggest it to a media personnel. Typically, a 24-hour notice is given to an SID, so you have time to prep the player or coach on what the media is actually going to ask them. And many times you might say there's a subject that they have to stick to, and they won't be answering questions on other subjects. And sometimes the media will send the questions ahead of time so that you can prep. A lot of that comes back to the relationship that you've created with that media outlet. And some even schedule all their marketing appearances for the players and coaches. So the community service, sometimes SIDs are in charge of that as well. They also work with athletes and coaches, and this is one of the fun parts, is that they get to nominate athletes for awards. Many times athletic directors are the ones that nominate them, but SIDs are also in charge specifically sometimes with academics. They also work with the media on media days, assigning positions at media tables, establishing relationships with them, providing equal exposure to all the reporters, and not allowing media to gain access to areas that are inappropriate. And so this is a big part of what they do as well. They also work with the conference and the league office in reporting statistics. So after every game, they send in statistics to both the conference as well as the NCAA. They're also in charge of ensuring NCAA privacy laws. So like I mentioned before, FERPA and HIPAA. FERPA being the education rights, so that deals with grades, anything that deals with the education side, and HIPAA, which is Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which essentially prohibits you from giving health information away about student athletes to media or other people who are asking. Another one of your job duties is to be a historian. You do game-by-game statistics, but also you keep a track of total statistics, and this is many times what you do during the game, but also between games. And probably one of the more fun things you get to do as well is travel. You go to championships. Larger programs, you would maybe go to all games. Smaller programs, it maybe depend on the game. Games that are close by geographically, or games that would be smaller in nature. All right, so what are some of the pros and cons of being an SID? One of the pros I just mentioned was travel, being able to go to a lot of games and be a part of that athletic culture, which is probably why many of you took this class, is because you like athletics in some form or fashion. You also get to deal with great student athletes, and obviously you get a lot of free stuff, a lot of swag. Some of the cons is at the same time travel, being away from your family, especially depending on the sport you are. Some sports travel more often and further distances than others, and the time that's associated with that. It's not an 8-to-5 type of job. You're there when the games happen, before and after. Many times you have to write your game story right after the game has occurred and during the game, and you're there an hour or two or later after the game. That's one of the cons. And you might have to deal with losing seasons. Your job is to try to get people interested in that team. And how are you going to do that if your team's not very good? And so those are some of the challenges that come with being an SID. So this is the last video of this chapter. Hopefully you enjoyed the class. Make sure that you have completed all the assignments going forward.